things to do with the alternative crops this week. And for that reason, you will see new faces today, and we hope that you will gain a lot from them. As the adage goes, if you do not eat food as medicine, you will eat medicine as food. And for that reason, producing enough food is quite essential for all of us. And not only producing enough, but also producing safe and nutritious food. Today, we are going to dive a little bit more into good agricultural practice. And in that line, we have specialists who will take us through what is entailed in good agricultural practice. To start us off, let me first of all introduce the panelists so that we are familiar with all of them. We have 3 who were with us last week, and this week we have 1 more. In order for the new one to also understand how we, to bring you to speed with how we introduce ourselves, let me ask Jen to start the introductory part, and then we will move to Uri, David, and then finally to the new entrants. I will not mention your name for now. Jen.
Thanks, Joshua. My name is Jane Musindi. I have been in the horticulture exports industry for a while, over 20 years. I am a trained agronomist, but I practice market access systems. We want to make sure our SMEs and our smallholder farmers follow the systems that will make their farming profitable. I'm a member of SOCA, Society of Crop Agribusiness Advisors of Kenya, where I serve as the technical coordinator. I also sit on the board of the agriculture board in KEPSA, the Kenya Private Sector Association, and I serve as the chair of the crop subsector. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Gabriel, your time.
Evening, my name is Gabriel Uri. I'm a trained agronomist. I'm a practicing farmer, and I love doing farming. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriel. David?
Thank you, everyone. My name is David Ndegwa. I'm an agronomist. Currently, I'm the managing director at Takazi Limited. I also do consultancy in a large-scale farm setting. So if one wants to set up a farm, that's my game. I've been in this game for quite some time, for a period spanning over 20 years. Today we are going to be sharing about, we are talking about production and good agricultural practices, and I welcome you to give us your ears. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Can we have Nekesah, and then we finalize with Alice?
So my name is Nekesah Wafullah, and I'm an agricultural economist. I also sit in the SOCA, the Society for Crop Agribusiness Advisors board. I also excel in business development. I work with to ensure that
Nekesah, we are losing you somehow.
Your sound.
Hello.
Yes, okay, continue, Nekesah.
My name is Nekesah. I'm a sales and development consultant. I work with a startup sure that they get their products to market, just looking at the whole value. And I work mostly with small.
Thank you. And finally, let's have the new lady, Alice. Could you tell us more about yourself? And I think you should have more time for introduction, because we did not hear from you here the last weekend, so you have more time today. Alice.
All right, good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for this opportunity to be here. I am absolutely honored and grateful that you have invited me and are willing to listen to my experiences. So I'll give you a background with regards to my connection with agriculture. I think that that will be the only way to shorten it. So I started dealing with agricultural traders when I worked with Maersk. So I worked with Maersk shipping line for about 15 years. And so I dealt with some of the major traders like Olam, the tobacco guys, tea, you know, and so on and so forth, fish and what have you. And then at some point I did work in Kenya. I've worked in a couple of countries such as Kenya, Tanzania, Djibouti, Uganda. So in my stint in Uganda, I was the country manager for Uganda, Congo, Rwanda, Burundi, and Southern Sudan. And I did visit quite a number of farmers because agricultural produce was the main export product that we were dealing with. So those were my clients on the export side. And then I also dealt a lot with avocado and mango exporters. And that's where I think my connection with agriculture clicked subconsciously at the time. And then I moved to Tanzania, and then I started trading in the export of live lobster and crab. And this was initially with a company whose logistics I was running. So for the entire Africa, so into Nigeria, Egypt, from China, Singapore, and Holland. And then on a personal side, I also invested in exporting of live lobster and crab from Tanzania to Hong Kong and Singapore. And that was an experience unto itself. So I did deal with fishermen and traders as well. And then from there, I moved to Kenya. And in Kenya, I invested in, or rather my husband and I invested in farming. So we started on a small scale shamba, you know, you come back and you say, okay, so what can we do? So we started doing a little bit of farming. We had excess produce. We spoke to a couple of hotels, and we did get quite a number of contracts from high-end restaurants and hotels, and we started to produce. So we went fully into large-scale farming from the sides of Gitaro, Kikuyu. And from there, we would grow, you know, a variety of produce and supply high-end restaurants and hotels. We also had contract farmers. And at the time, we were doing conventional farming. So basically, we were using fertilizers and herbicides and what have you to manage our farm. But one fine or not so fine Friday morning, we had an employee open a packet of herbicides with his teeth, and he started bleeding from everywhere. So he started bleeding from his ears, his eyes, from all his orifices, and he was in Kenyatta Hospital for 3 months. And that incident was quite traumatizing for myself. And so I really, really reflected and thought that this was, you know, this was despite having the company that provided us with our inputs, with training and certificates, you know. So this felt a little bit tricky. And so, you know, long story short, I decided to scale down and venture into urban gardening, so small scale, and just try to understand what are the safer ways of producing food, you know, in ways that are not harmful to human beings out of either neglect or, you know, mistakes and what have you. And so within that whole experience, at some point, I ran a restaurant in Westlands, selling, you know, also cooking some of the surplus that we grew. And, you know, and so at that point in time, based out of Westlands, I discovered a huge niche within the urban gardening sector, and felt that is where the next direction I needed to take, because I did not know how to do organic farming on a large scale. So I knew I really needed to understand organic production at a small scale to be able to scale, perhaps on a bigger perspective.
On a bigger scale.
And so within
fair enough,
on a bigger
Alice.
scale, right? So, yeah,
Alice, I will stop you for a minute. We will give you a lot more time because we've heard from you about fish and lobsters and those kind of things, and we just wonder if you have organic fish and lobsters. But we'll not talk about that to this evening. We will give you more time to present that to us or to the audience. We would like to go a little bit systematically, and your time is going to come and we will give you time. Let us briefly go back to our last week's discussion. And in our last week's discussion, we dealt a lot with things like things to do with the food security, like I mentioned earlier. We also dealt with market linkages, and at the same time, we dealt with production itself. And we have audience who probably missed out on last week's deliberations. And I would like to give this time now to Jen to recap a little bit on what we discussed last week. And after concluding that, please dive onto the main discussion of today, which is to do with good agricultural practice, what we call the GAP. So Jen, let me give you this time to start off.
Thanks, Joshua. So let's recap on what we talked about last week. So we discussed that you have to consider a few things before you start planting your crop in the ground. So we consider that you have to consider the farm history. On the farm history, weather patterns and seasons, type of farming in the neighborhood, previous activities carried out on the farm, the soil type and quality, availability of irrigation water, which means the quality and the quantity of the irrigation water, and what the legal requirements are for your area of production. For example, do you need a NEMA certificate? Do you need a water abstraction certificate? And so that you're legally compliant. And then we discussed that you have to consider your target market, because you have to consider whether it will be organic or conventional, what quantities will be required, what quality will be required in terms of sizes, color, the normal, what you see, what the customer will want to see. Then you'll have the market access requirements, which is safety, legality, and the standards. If you're, for example, targeting a supermarket, what standards will that supermarket, locally or internationally, require you to adhere to? And then you'll have to consider what crop alternatives you have. Number one, whatever you're growing, you have to incorporate a rotation plan. So what crops will you include in your rotation plan, and how do they react with one another? What are the characteristics of your main crop? What is its cycle? Is it short? Is it long? What is its water requirements? And is it suitable for that area of production? What pests and diseases are you likely to come across in production of this crop? What equipment will you require? What support systems are available in this? We mentioned that we have agrovets and we have extension services. You have to find out where you will get your chemicals, and in extension services, apart from the agronomy support, we have also spray service providers that are from AAK, Agrochemicals Association of Kenya. So they are fully trained appliers of these chemicals that will help you out in your chemical application. Do you have any in your area? And then what are the post-harvest handling requirements? Does it need a cold room, that crop that you're handling, or will you dry it after harvesting? And then labor, is there labor available? And when will you require this labor? Is it in cycles? Is it throughout? Are there farm facilities, on-farm facilities that will support your labor? And then you will need to prepare a cash flow plan or a budget, which will take care of all the costs. You have to including taxation requirements, insurance. If you're going to aggregate your products to a cooperative, you will need to be a member of this cooperative and you need to pay a membership fee. So it will have to be included in your cash flow plan or budget. And then what are your expected returns? You already have a target market. How do they pay? Do they pay every month, every week, every day? You'll have to consider that. So then you will deduct your expenses from your payments and then you get your net income. Will this farming be profitable? Then you'll go to post-harvest handling and you'll consider the storage available, suitability, duration, how long will you store this product for, what holding containers are required, logistics. Once you store it and you need to get it to the market, what transport is available, what types, is it suitable, what is the distance to the market, is it easily accessed, delivery frequency, are you expected to deliver per day, per week? You have to consider that. And what arrangements are required? You need to contract this transport. Then you will need, finally, we talked about a sustainability plan. For it to be a business, you can't start and stop. So you have to find a way to sustain your business. So you'll have to find a way to sustain your finances, to sustain your labor. Once you have the labor, how do you maintain them? Equipment, how do you maintain that equipment on the ground? The land, if suddenly you need to expand, how do you get more land? And also, the land deteriorates, so how do you conserve it? Then irrigation water. Suddenly, if your borehole is dry, do you have an alternative? And then your environment. We agreed that agriculture and environment are synonymous. So how do you conserve the environment so that it can sustain your agriculture? But today, we will look at the actual production. So we shall start with good agricultural practice. So now it's the actual production. So whether you're doing organic farming or conventional farming or something in between, you will need to follow a system that ensures that you minimize your costs and conserve the environment, and in the end, produce a safe product with evidence that it is safe, basically. So number one, in good agricultural practice, you need to consider your soil. You need to test your soil. Once you have tested the soil, most of the labs will give you a recommendation of what you need to do to improve it. What condition is that soil and how you need to improve it. Some of them will tell you to add manure. They'll tell you to lime in certain quantities. So you'll have to test the soil. The second consideration is seed. The seed must be certified, or if not certified, must be true to type. And the only way you can ensure it is true to type, it must be from a registered provider. So that at least if you have a problem in future, you have somewhere to go to for redress, because that person is registered by someone, and that person who they're registered to can actually enforce some punitive measures to the seed merchant. Number three, irrigation water. You must test it because some crops will require a certain quality of water. But most importantly, you must make sure that you're not introducing any contaminants to your crop. The way we manage it is that once you test your water and you see any contaminants, then you agree that you can either produce in that area or not, or look for alternative sources of irrigation water. Then crop spacing. Once you have decided what crop you're going to grow, then you must ensure that you're using the spacing that was recommended. If you use too wide a space, then you'll be wasting a lot of space and a lot of resources in the middle because, for example, if you're using a drip irrigation system, there'll be some place in the middle where water will be dropping without any crop. Then cultural practices, of course, you must keep the farm clean. You must, if the crop needs to be pruned, thinned, at what point you must consider that, and you must do it when it's supposed to be done. And you must maintain field hygiene. Once you have done all these practices, you can't just leave everything in the field, you must clear it. But there are some instances where you might need them for mulch. So you will consider the the priorities, what you need to do. Is it better leaving it on the farm, or is it better removing it from the farm? The reason some of people would remove from the farm is maybe they harbor pests or they harbor diseases, and it would be a bit more difficult to control these pests and diseases if you leave the rubbish on the ground. And then you have to consider your fertilizer application, the rate, the type, and the time of application. If you apply a nitrogenous fertilizer too late into production, then you'll not produce. The plant will trigger vegetative production. For example, it will not produce much. And if you do too much of the fertilizer application, we go back to nitrogenous, then you're shortening the shelf life of the harvested products. Then diseases and pest management. You cannot apply chemicals without doing scouting. You will scout. You will establish the level of infection or infestation of the insects. You can't just spray because you saw one insect or you saw one plant that is sick. You have to establish that at this point I must spray or I will lose the whole crop. Now at that point, the person who is, you must get a professional to advise you on which chemical to apply and at what rate. And usually what I mentioned earlier about spray service providers are trained to do this to carry out this service. And they will also recommend that the chemical to be applied, and considering at what point your production is at. If you're nearly harvesting, then they will give you a product that has a shorter pre-harvest interval, which is the interval between spraying and harvesting, so that this product is safe. If you spray today and harvest tomorrow, you are making that product unsafe and you're endangering somebody's life onwards. Then at what point do you harvest? There are some indicators of harvest. If you harvest too early, chances are the people harvesting will harvest too much, very immature product like what we are having now with avocados. Or if you send them in to a French bean farm too early, then you will be losing on a future production. So you must choose the harvesting time correctly, so that you harvest the most optimal product that is optimal at that point. Then in all this, you must keep your records. This we cannot go into today. There are various records that you need to keep to ensure that anybody coming to your farm can see that you are actually following the good agricultural practice. The other advantage of record keeping, in addition to assuring that your product is safe, is that it gives you, then it can help you make decisions for your following seasons. Thank you, Joshua. I'm ready to answer questions. You're muted.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you for that elaborate discussion on GAP. I think we will receive some questions from the audience, but that will come a little bit later. We first of all want to individually see how we grasp this whole idea about good agricultural practice. And I would like to also listen to the other panelists who can also give us what their views are with regard to good agricultural practice. Jen has clearly taken us through the process, which involves, of course, starting right from the soil itself and what you should do to the soil before you actually start planting, to the choice of seed, to the choice of chemical and its usages, and even to the post-harvesting stage and even record keeping. So this is a fairly holistic thing, and it does not just start with only one element in that list. David, what is your opinion about good agricultural practice, and how relevant is it, or it is, to food safety and proper nutrition?
David, you're muted.
David, please unmute.
Hello,
Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Joshua. Thank you for having me this evening. Yes, Jane has done a wonderful job. She has actually highlighted in point form what we are talking about, good agricultural practices. Let me say that good agricultural practices was actually designed to make sure that wastages and losses in agriculture are minimized, and to make sure that whatever is done in agriculture, it should be geared towards making it good for the people consuming the food, the environment, that is both aquatic life and also things like bees. So when you are practicing good agricultural practices, you are actually ensuring that you are safeguarding the environment, which is very, very important. The act of farming itself should not disrupt the environment. You should try to ensure that you fit into the environment as much as possible. Jane has given us clear in point form, and mostly I would like to run through the same and expound more on what has been said. Many people would ask, why are we interested in the soil? Why can't we just go into the farm and start farming? It's very, very important to understand that the soil, as much as it is important for crop production, it can become a source of contaminant, and it's very, very important to ensure that soil contamination is reduced. How do you reduce it? You reduce it by, especially for example, when you identify the site. Last time we talked about site selection. If you want to farm, you need to have a site. And if you follow what we talked about, site selection, then you get the site. Once you have the site, you're dealing with the soil and you have the crop that you want to grow in mind. So this site, the soil can become a contaminant if the site was a node, was used as the land was used as a garage. So there could be contaminants such as like high levels of lead. You could also get high levels of heavy metals, namely mercury and other metals. So these, once you do the soil analysis, the soil analysis will be able to show you the essential nutrients and those that are not essential, which could also be which could be harmful to human health or even to livestock health in case you are growing for feed for livestock. So it's very, very important to ensure that once the site has been selected, the soil analysis has been done. Site with high levels of heavy metals should be avoided. Site with very high levels of sodium should be avoided because sodium will also affect the crop growth. Once you've selected the soil, mainly when you talk about the soil, many people think about soil pH. Soil pH is not the major component that we check on when you're looking at the soil. You look at the soil pH, if it is low on the side of acidic, you can improve it by adding lime. And also, most importantly, you cannot design a fertilizer program if you don't have a soil analysis report. That soil analysis report will give you the content of nutrients that are in the soil in parts per million. And then the crop in question will dictate the amount of NPK or nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium quantities that will be required. If you look at your soil and then you see that you have some deficits, when you're designing the soil, the fertilizer program, you try and fill those deficits. For example, if K is low, you look at the K that will be required by a crop of maize if you're intending to grow maize, and then you design your soil, your fertilizer program that will be able to sufficiently provide the K that is deficient in your soil in order to support the kind of production that you're looking for. Once you do that, you are able to balance. As you balance, you also, when you're designing the fertilizer program, you push your levels a bit higher to ensure that you include some some nutrients supplements for maintaining the soil. And in the same breath, Jenna said about when you use high levels of nitrogen, you might increase the vegetative nature of your crop and to the expense of production. Let's say, for example, for tomatoes, if you have a bushy plant of tomatoes as opposed to the ideal plant, then it will have produced more leaves to the expense of fruit formation. It might even end up aborting or dropping some of the flowers. So you need to know what quantities of nitrogen that are there in your soil so that you get to know what to add, and you also have to understand what your tomato will require, how much your tomato will require, so as not to use more or use less. By so doing, you will have helped in increasing your production because you not have applied more. And then there is also a danger of applying more nitrogen to the soil because, you know, there's various ways where nitrogen is lost through the soil, from the soil. One of them being volatilization. And so you also it can be leached. When it is leached, it goes to the groundwater, or it can be taken to the rivers used through soil erosion together with the soil. And then it contaminates the water. High nitrate in the water is harmful to human life, and it's not good. So it's very, very important to ensure that we understand what we need to do in our soil. Seed, I won't dwell too much on the seed because Jane touched on that. And apart from when you're using certified seeds, you do a lot of good to yourself because last time we talked about when the breeders of the seeds are breeding these seeds, they always look for desired characteristics. If for the maize, they're looking for maize that is high yielding. If you are using non-certified seeds, then you'll be shooting yourself in the arm by helping yourself to lower your yields, and I'm sure no farmer who is interested in producing less. We are always looking for producing more per unit area, and that is our mantra because land cannot be expanded. It's a fixed asset. It's diminishing because of the uses that we are subjecting it to. We can only increase our production using the appropriate or using the technology. Irrigation water, mainly why people would ask yourself, why would you analyze the water? Mainly you don't want the water, irrigation water, whether borehole or the river may carry those contaminants, which as I talked, you could still have heavy metals in the soil, in the water, same as the soil. I don't want to dwell on crop spacing because I talked about crop spacing last time, but I would like to talk about fertilizer application. Let me touch on spraying. And I'm going to expound more on this because this is the line that pushes more people towards looking for organic food, because they think that the food that you consume, once the sprays have been done, they become unsafe. I want to say this about chemicals. Good agricultural practices dictates that before you make a decision to spray, you have to do scouting to the crop. You scout your crop. When you're scouting the crop, you're looking for, you know how a healthy crop looks like. When you see any abnormality from the normal, that either translate into a disease. That disease could be that is caused by pathogens, or could be a physiological factor. That those diseases that or defects that emanates from lack of fertilizers, and also other weather-related issues. So the moment you decide to spray, after the scouting report has shown that you really need to spray. Let's say, for example, if you are scouting for thrips, there are those thresholds that you should be looking for. If you are scouting for thrips, if you are doing a crop of snow peas, which the tolerance levels on marks on pods is very low, then your thresholds on thrips should be like less than 5%. if you see thrips that are less than 5% in a crop of snow peas, yes, you have to spray. Because if you don't, then you'll subject your crops to rejection. If, for example, you are growing onions, the threshold goes up because even if it's not very high, it's not very likely that you'll get thrip marks on onion bulb. And an onion bulb, even if it has thrip marks, then it cannot end up being rejected as the way you would have the snow peas rejected. So those thresholds differ depending on which crop you are talking about. Now, once you decide to spray, and let's say, for example, snow peas, and you are targeting thrips, you look for the most effective chemical that is allowed, that has a label recommendation for thrips. And then you look at the stage of your crop, look at the pre-harvest interval allowed in this product. If you are going to harvest before the days elapses, then you eliminate that chemical. If you'll be within the harvesting date after, if the PHI allows, then you go ahead and spray that chemical. Then you also look at the toxicological levels. If the product is in class 1, you keep it aside. If you have a class 3, you better use a class 3 more than the class 1. You can only spray class 1 or class 2 in situations whereby you do not have a class 3. A class 3 is much safer when it comes to spraying than class 2 or class 1. Once you've decided to use the chemical and you have selected the chemicals, you have eliminated all the chemicals, and you have picked on the suitable one, then you need to consider the people who are going to use the chemicals and see whether they will need the PPE or personal protective equipment, what type of PPE is required for that specific chemical. Right from the dispensing, the storeman has to have the right PPE. The person who is spraying has to have the right PPE as per the chemical or the pesticide level that you're using. Once you have the PPEs and you have decided now to go to the field to spray, you ensure that there are no people working in the field that is going to be sprayed on. After you have ensured that the spray program starts, or the spray act now starts, after spraying, you have to ensure that the workers don't go back to the harvested spray, and you put a flag, a red flag, to show that that is danger. It's a danger zone, and workers are not supposed or are not allowed into that block. Then once one day has elapsed, and especially most of the chemicals have days that they have re-entry period. There's a difference between re-entry period and pre-harvest interval. Re-entry period is the time or the number of hours that have to elapse before workers are allowed into a treated crop. Why do we have to do this? Because once you spray a crop, there are those fumes that when we are using you mix the pesticide with water. Once you spray, evaporation starts immediately, and fumes, those are fumes. You ensure that by keeping the workers away, you are protecting them from these kind of fumes. But if they go there one day after spraying, and if for the pregnant mothers or expectant mothers, they are allowed more time because of the vulnerability. So these are the things that you have to take. Now, once you do that, you also have to, in the spraying aspect, you have also to manage your resistance. So why do you manage resistance? You manage resistance because you don't want to use a certain pesticide today, and then use it next week or the other week, because pesticides have a way of fighting back, and they build resistance to these pesticides. Once you subject them once you spray, next time you come and use the same chemical, you'll find that, or you may find that the killers will not be as effective as the first one. because those pests or the diseases will develop resistance. To avoid that, you ensure that you are alternating pesticide with different mode of action. And when I say different mode of action, we're not talking about brands here. We're not talking about brand names. We're talking about active ingredients or chemical groups. Let's say, for example, if I may give you an example, you could be using duduthirin. Duduthirin is a pyrethroid. So if you spray duduthirin this week, and next week you come with a Fastac, which is another pyrethroid, you don't have alternated the names, but it's the same class. So you need to ensure that you are using or you are spraying pesticide with different mode of action in order to manage resistance. Now, when it comes to human consumption, human beings are protected through the pesticides through observing PHI or pre-harvest interval, the period of time that has to elapse or the number of days that have to elapse between spraying and when you harvest your crop. When you harvest your crop, it is supposed to be safe. Or it may have residues in it, but those chemical residues, depending on the observation and the scientific data available, those are the allowable residues that are supposed to be, that could be in the product before it is presented for selling. And this is where MRL comes from, maximum residue levels. And many people confuse this with minimum residue level. It's not minimum, it's maximum. Maximum allowable residues in a product for it to be considered safe for consumption. Is MRL a safety measure? No, it's not. MRL is not a safety measure. MRL is a measure which is taken or adopted to ensure that you can be able to show whether good agricultural practices took place. For example, if somebody did not follow the label when he was spraying his product, and then which leads to overdosage, the only way you can know that that person did not follow the label instructions is by analyzing the residues in that particular crop that was sprayed. If you follow the label instructions as stipulated, there is no way you would exceed the MRLs, because these MRLs are not just figures. These are set after analysis of various data and ensuring that whatever it is said or whatever MRL, for example, if you spray oxystrobin on a crop, and then with a PHI of 3 days, and then just an example, the MRL is 0.3, if you test after spraying and observing those 3 days PHI, you are not supposed to see anything in exceedance of 0.3. And this is how MRLs are followed. In short, if we spray our crops using the recommended chemicals according to the label, use the right dosage rate, observe the PHI, we will be safeguarding the person handling the chemicals from the store, the person spraying, the workers in the farm, and also the consumer. And that's why within this talk, I would want to assure people who have been shying away from picking vegetables from supermarkets that have been sprayed. Actually, those products, if you buy from those farmers who are practicing good agricultural practices, you will not be putting your health into any danger, and you'll be eating safe food. Now, what is this so much talk about chemicals? Who is the highest person? Who is the person who bears the highest risk when it comes to spraying chemicals? is actually the storeman, or the person who is dispensing chemicals in their concentrated form. The second person in that line is the spray operator, because this is the guy who is now handling the chemicals in semi-concentrated form. The third person who is in the line of danger is the worker who is working in the field. And the last person is the consumer. If you look at the amount of chemical that is in there, I don't want to say that this is not important, but the person who carries the least harm is the consumer. All these requirements that were put in place, mainly by EU, which the EU members were very concerned, because chemicals are poisonous. If you use them wrongly, you will endanger human life, environment, and everybody who comes into the line of spraying. Now, the other thing that I want to touch on is crop rotation. I want to touch this crop rotation because it's one line that is majorly misunderstood. Why do we crop rotate? We do crop rotate because we want to manage our soil. Actually, crop rotation is a way of managing the soil. One reason as to why we want to manage the soil, because we have nutrients in the soil, and then our crops, the crops that we plant, have different characteristics. So once you want to adopt, when you're doing crop rotation, you have to plant. Your crop rotation plan has to have at least more than 4 crops in a rotation sequence. These are crops which should be planted in one area within a given time. So let's say, for example, your crop is beans, and I'm saying beans because many farmers we have many French beans farmers. If your bean is your major crop, before you come to the field that had beans, you need to go through 4 crops, a minimum of 3 crops before you come back with beans. Why? Beans are attacked by you could have fusarium attacking the beans. Now, this fusarium in the soil, most of these soil pathogens are always in the soil. But they could be in levels which could not manifest as diseases once you plant the crop for the first time. For a crop to manifest or to show symptoms of a disease, the pathogens must be at a certain level, higher enough, which is called pathogenic potential, for them to cause symptoms or affect the crop. So if, for example, you start with a virgin land that had very low counts of fusarium and you plant beans, then by the time you finish that crop, the levels would be higher than where you started from. If then you plant another legume that plays host to the fusarium. Fusarium is not actually a good example because it is a host. It has a wide range of hosts. Let's talk about bacterial wilt. Let's say you have a virgin soil, you've planted your potatoes, and then you see 1 or 2 potatoes that has bacterial wilt. If you go back and plant potatoes back in the same field, the second crop will have more plants affected by bacterial wilt than you had in the first planting. So the third plant will be looking like a bushfire because you'll be fueling the bacterial wilt or the Sangomonas in the soil. So for you to break that routine or that buildup of soil-borne diseases, you plant potatoes or tomatoes. Then the next crop should be a brassica. Brassica are not affected by bacterial wilt. The third crop should be a crop that is not a host to bacterial wilt, which should be something like beans or a root crop. A root crop because it will extract nutrients deeper than the cabbages or the brassicas. And you could, as your fourth crop, you could come with a cereal. But for the sake of this talk, a good rotation program starts with a cereal, followed by a legume. Legume because the cereals extract nutrients from deeper levels of the soil. You come with a legume. Why? Because legumes extract nutrients from the upper, they are shallow rooted. They eat from upper surface. And then they also add nitrogen through rhizobium bacteria. They fix nitrogen to the soil, so they enrich your soil. The third crop, you come with a brassica. The fourth crop, you come with a root crop, and then the fifth crop, you go back to your main crop, which is cereals. So if you manage your soils like that, then you will be able to maintain your production throughout, and you'll be able to manage your soils well, which is also a very significant aspect of good agricultural practices. Thank you very much. I would welcome questions probably at the end of the talk. Thank you. Thank you, Gabriel. Thank you, Joshua. Sorry.
Thank you, David. Wow, that was quite a piece of advice there. David brings issues to do with production, and that makes you feel like you're actually walking along with him in the field. So I think we are lucky to have that wealth of knowledge from you, David. Thank you for that presentation. You've also brought up very key issues, especially on issues to do with the right use of fertilizers, the use of correct usages, correct rates. You've also talked about maximum residue allowable levels, and also crop rotation. Now, all these factors end up in growing or producing fairly safe food for all of us. And with that, I think our speaker later, Alice, must be sharpening her daggers to try and counter this. But I think it is all for the sake or for the good of all of us that we are able to grow food either conventionally or organically, but still achieve the same results. Thank you very much, David, for that presentation. I would like at this moment to move to our next presenter, and that is Gabriel. And for you, Gabriel, before you dive into what you had prepared for us this evening, David and Jen both mentioned issues to do with the interpretation of soil analysis, and at the same time, the role of advisors, especially when it comes to advising the less knowledgeable people in our community who may not be able to interpret the soil analysis, and the role of advisors at that point. So Gabriel, as you go into what you have for us, please also try to tackle that issue. Welcome.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, my predecessors, David and Jane. Good presentation. Maybe I will challenge the farmers on good agricultural practices. I find them as principles behind what is this gap. For me, I see it's the principles. Anytime you talk about principles, there has to be the why do I need to do this? And if you look at from the way David has elaborated, why do I need to do soil testing? Because first of all, as he says, you might get bacterial wilt. Brassica don't get it, as he says. So why not come and do brassicas before wasting a lot of time doing a crop that will be affected by bacterial wilt, and then you end up using a lot of chemical and a lot of time, and your production will be low. That is a principle behind soil testing. What is the principle behind certified seed? The same principle behind an unhealthy baby. The crop will grow with issues. So that's a principle why you need certified seed or true to type. Another principle, if you are farming as a business, you need certified seed because you do not want to waste a full season and so much money, yet you cannot go back and no one is accountable. So you need to get seed where you know someone is accountable. Irrigation water, why do you need to test it? Your irrigation water needs to be tested. It might be having a low pH, high pH, which affects your chemical use. Crop spacing. Crop spacing is obvious. You need enough light. You need enough to avoid a lot of competition on the nutrition and such factors. Also, sometimes during harvesting, you need that space to harvest and to move around when spraying or for other farm operations. Cultural practices. What is the principle behind them? Weeding, pruning, thinning, field hygiene. I won't elaborate on that. You cannot grow crops without weeding if you have weeds. This is already competition. Fertilizer application. What's the principle behind fertilizer application? It's the food for the plant. Disease and pest management. I won't touch that. Harvesting. What is the principle behind harvesting? For me, harvesting, the principle behind is what will I have gained after a long season of growing crops. Record keeping. This is one of the most important yet most ignored. The principle behind record keeping is you need to know, what have I been keeping here? What chemicals have I been using? Have they been working? How much have I invested? Have I made it? Where did I go wrong? From records, you're able to come back and see what went well, what didn't go well. What can I change? What can't I change? As an agronomist, if I come to your field and I ask you 3-4 questions, first of all, if you start complaining, telling me my crop this, that, I will ask you questions. If you don't have the records, it becomes very difficult to advise you, because I will be now like digging a well in a pond area, a marshy area, because it could be the effects that are harming your crop are so many. But if you have records, we start by elimination. So I think for farmers, embrace good agricultural practices as good principles that help you with your farming. I don't have much. My brother David and my sister Jen have given quite the lecture. I was also following. In fact, it's just that I'm a panelist. I wanted to start on my own questions to David,
Yes,
but maybe I will do that later. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Uri. Yeah, those questions are going to come. We will have a complete session on the question and answers. We are already receiving quite a number of them, and we will tackle them as time goes by. Ladies and gentlemen, we now would like to hear an alternative view from one of the panelists. And this is a lady who is quite passionate about organic growing. She already gave us a glimpse of what to expect from her in her introduction. Alice, could you take us through this whole essence of alternative cropping procedures? I feel that organic growing is a totally separate procedure. As your predecessors here have talked, they've said to us that if you manage your crop in a manner that you observe, the standards, the good agricultural practice, as they call it, then we have no fears of eating the foods that have been grown conventionally. Could you take us through what your thoughts are, Alice?
Okay, thank you very much. And I would like to clarify that much as I do have my own experience in terms of conventional farming, I am absolutely not against it, and I am absolutely for good agricultural practices, because that is the way to go. And pursuing organic farming commercially is a different ballgame altogether. So being able to I understand that side of things, and my focus is really on small space gardening, urban gardening, and therefore all I do is teach individuals how to grow their own food. So that's a completely separate conversation as opposed to producing food for commercial output. So I do subscribe to good agricultural practices. If there is a way in which the consumer can be able to measure, that would be great. But at the end of the day, if I go to the market, even I do that today, if I go to the market, I buy an onion or a tomato, I will not necessarily know, the history that has come from the farm, and I would only trust that the farmer did practice good agricultural practices. So I just want to clarify that. And even if those that I'm teaching want to do any form of soil amendments or treatment using any form of chemicals at that point in time, then my guidance is based on good agricultural practices. So whilst I do talk about organic gardening, I believe that that is the easiest and the cheapest on a small scale for individuals, and as such, that is where my interest is right now. But it's not necessarily to say that I'm all against bad agricultural practices, as everybody in the panel here is too. So once, if it's practiced right, then yeah, then I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay, thank you, Alice. Okay, you are not entirely against conventional, but there has been recently a lot of discussion around this topic of organically grown crops in relation to conventional crops that many feel that are probably carrying poisonous stuff. But as we have heard from our experts here, there's really no need to fear. There's no reason to fear as long as proper practices are observed. What would you tell those who still have this mentality or this line of thought that organically grown crops should be the safest? Because I think even conventionally grown crops are fairly safe as long as the issues that have been brought up by the other panelists are observed. Alice.
Okay. It is akin to going to a doctor, going to a hospital, getting a prescription, and you deciding how you're going to consume that medicine, right? So if you decide to consume more than the prescribed dose, that becomes poison. But if you consume the prescribed dose, that becomes medicine. And I think that's the same principle. So I think the biggest challenge we have, and maybe sometimes it could come from the media, it could come because the consumer has no other way of telling, right? So we do see a lot of reports that say, food has not been produced in a safe manner, especially things like leafy greens that are, that look abnormal, if I could say so, right? But what is a normal leafy green supposed to look like? What is a correctly produced crop supposed to look like? So I feel the onus is really on the industry practitioners, such as yourselves and myself included, to be able to educate consumers well enough to understand the difference between overused chemicals within the farm and what the products look like. I remember there was a time when there was a big wave of saying no to tomatoes produced from the greenhouse because the perception was that they're oversprayed, and so even I myself, I know I used to have a big problem when I would go to my clients and they would say, no, chefs would say this tomato has been produced in a greenhouse, I don't want it. How they would know is because of the way it looked. So a lot of the agricultural challenges, if I could call them that, are perception based. Yeah, there are people who say they produce crops organically, but what's the measure? You see? So unless you're certified, so like I have gone out of my way to get certified because my conscience tells me that that's the right way to do it. But a lot of people say, I produce, I do organic production, but there's no way to prove it, you see. So at the end of the day, it is up to the producers to do the right thing and to be able to educate consumers in a way that they can question and in a way they can discern and determine what has been safely produced and or not. And so one of the ways that I know I try to do is tell them, try and grow something so that you know what it looks like when it's growing. So when you go to the market to buy, or you can then be able to tell, okay, does this look like it's been naturally produced? Even through good agricultural practices, most of the time, your produce will look, if I want to call it normal, but there are times when you will see for yourself the way this produce looks, this horticultural produce looks, there's something wrong. So being able to educate consumers, for me, I feel is an industry responsibility that tells people, look, the chemical itself may not be the problem, but it could be, the problem is maybe might come with the way in which it has been applied, but also more often than not, it is applied right, because it's normally a side of this side versus that side, one side trying to look better than the other. But I do not believe, one side is indeed better than the other. It's about what works and what we are able to do to produce food sustainably, because we do need to have a sustainable food production for the country, and we cannot start talking about judging and saying the way you're producing this food is not right. It's got to be, everybody has got to play their role and produce food in a way that is healthy and sustainable for the society, to be able to have a good, healthy food production through and through.
Okay, thank you very much, Alice. I think you've brought that quite clearly. I was actually heading towards asking you whether production, whether food security, what your opinion would have been as far as organic production in relation to food security, because we deal a lot with the food safety, and that's what is all in our minds, that organically grown stuff contribute to safer food. But what about the security involved? If we start to produce only organically, are we able to meet the needs in terms of quantities that are required? This has been a discussion for quite a long time, and I think all of us would agree that it is something that would still be there with us for quite a while. But we want to rest that for now, because we want to move on to the next stage, where we are going to look at some of the questions that our audience have thrown around. I know quite a number of them have been answered remotely by our technical team that is working in the background. But my panelists, I think there are quite some questions there. For David, one gentleman asked you actually to repeat what you said about fertilizer application and usage. I think he didn't get you right there. And then we have Ricky would like to answer a question on concerning the PHI as consumer. Somebody says, that is Caro Mwanzali, says concerning PHI, as a consumer, we cannot determine if PHIs are observed at harvesting. Can washing the product thoroughly with fruit, vegetable detergents or vinegar reduce the residue content? That is a concern from Caro. There's also Anthony Kirago, who says, how do we educate our farmers on soil testing, and how do we make testing facilities available and affordable to farmers? The other question is, who or where can I contact in Eldoret, Kapsabet area to come to test the soil in my farms? For these questions, any one of us in the panel can pick any of them, but I think Ricky would have liked to answer quite a number of them. I don't see him on the screen, but yeah, if any panelists can take any part of that, those questions, I would be happy.
David, unmute.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes,
yeah.
Thank you.
One for fertilizer application and usage, which was actually directed to me. The question is quite broad, and I would maybe repeat. When it comes to decisions about fertilizer, you apply fertilizer to a specific crop, and before you apply, you need to understand fertilizer application is actually about supplementing. So most of the nutrients are already in the soil. So you want to know how much is in your soil before you start applying any fertilizer, so that you get to know what you need to add. So the first step is to do soil analysis. Once you do the soil analysis from an accredited lab, so don't just go to any lab and get your analysis results. So once you get your soil analysis results, you'll be given in form of the available nutrients in the soil based on the crop that you want to grow. The agronomist or the expert who is advising you will be able to understand the amount of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium extracted or required by your crop. For example, maize to produce X number of bags. So if you, for example, you plant crops in an acre, it gets 20 bags. Within those 20 bags, if you analyze the content of the 20 bags, you will find X amount of phosphorus, X amount of nitrogen, X amount of potassium. All those will have been extracted or taken away from the soil. Now, you need to understand how much is my maize going to take. For example, 30 bags. And this is what this is the information that agronomists will be able to use for them to be able to advise. So what you need to do is to do your soil analysis, invite an expert, tell him the crop that you want to grow, and then he'll give you the fertilizer requirement. Now, when it comes to fertilizer requirement, you may be given the right fertilizer, but then you use poor application method, which will not benefit your crop. One way of applying fertilizer is through broadcasting. If you broadcast, it has to be evenly broadcasted. If you're applying fertilizer on an acre, each and every of those 400, 4,000, 1 acre is approximately 4,000 meters squared. Each one of those meters must have equal amount of fertilizer. Otherwise, you'll have some zones having more and others having less. So it's very, very important for you to ensure that you use the right amount. You spread your fertilizer well. Once you've been given, for example, if you're told to use 200 kilos of DAP in an acre, get your length. An acre, if it's 4,000 meters squared, you take an example of 50 meters by 80 meters. So you divide, so your width would be, your length would be 80 meters, and your width would be 50 meters. So you divide the width by 8 or by 10, so you get 8 strips. Then you divide the 100 kilos into 8, and then you apply the number of kilos, the specific kilos in each strip. That will ensure that you have the uniformity. Then, if you're planting using DAP or phosphorus, part of DAP is immobile in the soil. So you have to apply it where the roots will be able to access it. So once you apply, you have to mix or to incorporate the fertilizer together with your soil. Then you also have to have a good understanding of the fertilizer application. There are those fertilizers that are required for early root development, like DAP. The phosphorus part of it will support early root development for the anchorage of the crop. The longer the roots, the wider the area of other nutrients and water uptake. Once you do that, at vegetation stage, you need to know that nitrogenous fertilizers are required to build your leaves, wide leaves, so that you can have good area for photosynthesis. And then you don't apply fertilizers with high nitrogen levels at planting because of leaching. You only do so when your crop has developed the mouth of your crop in the roots. So the roots will be able to uptake the fertilizer. If, for example, you use CAN before your crop has the roots, then you'll end up losing that CAN. Not unless now fertilizer is a very broad subject. I can talk for many hours, and I would want to add there, and if there is any other questions, I would be free to answer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, David. I think you've answered the person who questioned you about fertilizer application, and I think that answer should be sufficient. We then have just one more question concerning the PHI, and where one of the consumers asked how you can determine the PHI and how this is observed at harvesting. Jen, I think you have some experience with this kind of issues. Could you maybe answer this question in the meantime?
Okay, thanks, Joshua. The mode of action of a pesticide will determine how you will reduce its presence in the crop, in the product. So we have two modes of action: there's systemic and there's contact. A contact chemical kills the insect on contact. So the insect has to be touched by that chemical. The systemic one, the chemical actually travels through the system of the plant. The sap of the plant intakes the chemical. So whenever the insects feed on the crop, then they will be affected. Now you understand that systemics go through the crop. So washing that product will not reduce the level of chemical in that product. But the contact ones, to some level, will reduce because it's on the surface. It has not been intaken by the product. So no, you cannot. It's not a blanket advice that you can wash and reduce the chemicals within the product. The only way you can be sure that this crop has a low PHI is if you know that the farmer followed the pre-harvest interval, not the pre-entry, the pre-harvest interval. So this pre-harvest interval says that because from the time you spray this product to the time you harvest, the chemical should have broken down enough to safer products that now can be consumed by consumers safely. If that PHI has not been observed, there's nothing you can do to that crop, to that product to make it safer. So that's why we introduce product testing, periodic product testing. For those who follow standards and who are certified, like the lady Alice that pursues certification as a practice, one of the requirements to acquire a certificate is that you guarantee that this crop you have you're following all the right processes to ensure that it is safe for consumers. So it will be tested in a lab, registered lab, and the pH, the MRLs, as David put them, will be specified. It will be tested and it will be put against the requirements of that product, because different products have different requirements, and then it will be passed as either safe or unsafe. So yeah, you cannot wash. So you have to follow the good agricultural practices. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Jen. That's quite clear now. There's one question, not a question, but just a comment from Jack Juba, who really is, I would say, not very happy with some technologies here, because he says food safety is a national obligation for organic or convention. However, organic focuses on bigger sustainability issues, biodiversity, soil health, and not allowing some controversial technologies such as GMO and irradiation, nanotechnology, and so on and so on. I think this discussion has been there in other forums. So yeah, Victor is just bringing that issue up, that this has to really be focused on sustainability. I don't know if there's anyone who wants to make a comment on that, but besides that, Mr. I don't know, it should be a Mr. Madufal also has commented on whether it is possible to maximize safe food production through organic farming. I think that has been covered quite extensively by Alice and also David. Godfrey Wanyoni asks if there's any information on MRIs for indigenous vegetables. And he particularly asks Mr. Ndegwa to give a take on it. I don't know for what reason. Maybe he feels you are the best to answer that question. And I think those are the questions that we have on the screen at the moment. So David, would you like to tackle anything that the audience have asked?
I'm sure there are set MRIs for local foods. If you are using a chemical that has label recommendation for the food that for the crop that you're spraying on, let's say if just for purpose of mentioning, if Ridomil, for example, has a label recommendation for tomatoes, they must have presented data for the MRIs for that particular crop. So yes, my answer is yes, those MRIs exist for those local crops. If, for example, it is indicated in the product that it's recommended for that purpose. For any product that has no label recommendation on, then there would be no existing MRL for that particular crop. Thank you. If there is anything that I have omitted, maybe Jane could. Jane has dealt mainly on these MRLs for the local crops. And one thing, there was a time Jane really made me happy when she told me that they did an exercise. They collected samples from vegetables found in the local market, and they did sampling. And she was expecting to find loads and loads of residues in those products and on those vegetables, but there was none, which actually shocked her. And that is reason enough to put smiles on people's faces that what you're consuming, guys, it's safe. The other thing is that there's one thing that I would like to mention. It could be, maybe it's not good. It's not a good agricultural practice, but it's also helping to improve the safety of the product, of the food that we are consuming. The farmers who I've observed many farmers, and I've been talking to many small-scale farmers. I haven't seen any single farmer who is exceeding the dosage rate. Why? Because chemicals are expensive. People normally assume that farmers are just spraying. No, farmers are also caring about their costs. There's no farmer who would want to spray tomatoes every day, because these chemicals also cost money. And farmers are also observing PHI. The small scale farmers that I've interacted with, they are observing the PHI. Could be we have some few log farmers, but I'm sure, as Jane attested or witnessed, that we do not have those alarming levels. Actually, not alarming. She didn't find anything wrong with the food that is sold in our market. Thank you.
Let me just answer David. There are some products that really no spray goes on to. Like for indigenous vegetables, most farmers use them as rotation crops. They just use them so that the land does not remain idle. So they do nothing to that crop because, again, the buying price for these crops, for these products is very low. So they practically use nothing. But for the farmers that are doing it commercially, there was an attempt to make it, to overuse farm inputs. But again, it went back down because it is related to the price that you get. At the end of the day, you need a profit. So the more inputs you use in these products, the less the profit will be. So for indigenous vegetables, mostly it's not really a problem. But what we know is a problem is, for example, you get farmers who believe they can circumvent the process. They will bring in, I will give you a direct example. We have tomato farmers that farm around on the border of Tanzania and Kenya. Kenya really regulates the chemicals we use in our crops, but Tanzania doesn't. So what they'll do, because the chemicals that we use in Kenya are those that are safe for human consumption, they will get something from over the border, which works a little faster, but it's not necessarily safe. So they will use it on their tomatoes, wherever they will grow it, so that the insects are taken care of completely. But they have been found out. We have regulators in Kenya, some of the labs, cafes, and others, they have taken this product for testing, and there's already interventions on how to stop this product from getting into the market. So yes, in farming, yes, you'll have those rogue farmers, but somehow they shall be found out and something will be done with them. There is a standard now that the government is coming up with called KS 1758, and all farmers, vegetable farmers, must adhere to this standard. I would urge all our farmers to familiarize themselves with this standard. At SOCA, we have some handbooks that we developed, how to simplify this standard so that everybody understands what it requires. In another 6 months, you will not get licensed if you are not following this standard. And for you to sell on the local market, you will need this license from Horticultural Crops Directorate. So you understand, you need to start now familiarizing yourself with this standard so that when the time comes, you are compliant to this standard. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jane. And I think on that note, we would like to now start winding up for the evening. Just one last question: where can one test products for MRL? I think either Jane or David, you can just in a very brief moment, and also take that opportunity to give your parting shots after answering that question. Could I give that to David? Do you know anywhere that MRL can be tested locally?
Yeah, SGS labs usually do that. I don't know whether cafes do it commercially. Then I can see Gabriel nodding. Yeah,
yeah, they do it. Yeah.
Good.
Okay, so Carol, your question has been answered. Ladies and gentlemen, I think our time is up or almost up. I would like to now just a quick round of final messages to our audience. Let me today start not necessarily with the lady. I think today I'll end with the lady. So Gabriel, could you just give us some of your last words for tonight?
Because I've seen some of the comments on organic farming, and it looks like there's still that misconception that organic farming is not using chemicals. As I quoted last week, organic farming is a full process. How you store your produce, how you carry it, how you grow it, where you get your seed, including if you're using farmyard manure, is it safe? We share some diseases with pigs. You've used manure from pigs. Are you sure it is clean? So this conception, people need to understand that organic farming, yes, I know why people target the chemicals, because chemicals are built to kill or manufactured to kill. So that is why you have to be careful with them. But if you manage to follow good agricultural practices, use the right chemical at the right time and in the right way, then your food will be safe. So that will be my parting shot for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriel. David, what are your last thoughts?
Good, thank you. Good agricultural practices are similar to what I would call good driving practices. If you get into the road and you start driving anyhowly instead of using using the left side, you keep on using right and left, the possibility is that we may lose you and you may end up to the next world where people goes where we don't know. Now, good agricultural practices is the discipline of farming. If you follow it, then you will doing a lot of good to yourself because you'll be saving money. You will be safeguarding the health of workers in your farm and environment. And also you'll be safeguarding the lives of the consumers. My parting shot is that because we are enhancing on good agricultural practices, and I've seen these practices being followed even by small-scale farmers, let us not create fear to our consumers that they are consuming bad food. There's a very thin line, if it ever exists, between conventionally grown food where good agricultural practices have been observed and organic food. In fact, if I go to supermarkets and I find, and I'm convinced that the vegetables on the shelves are conventionally grown where good agricultural practices have been observed, I would buy it. I would pick it the same way I would pick the organic farm, the organic produce. And the other thing is that as an expert and the person who understands these things in the way they are done, I buy from Marikiti. I will not hesitate to have my sukuma wiki or spinach from Marikiti. If I go to any supermarkets, I would pick my burgers without having to tell myself that it's not safe. Because from what I've seen by walking around, I interact a lot with farmers. I know the food that you are eating is safe. And if there is unsafe food out there, it's a very small percentage. Just as the way electricity can kill you if you use it wrongly, then chemicals can also kill you if they are used wrongly. So we are not talking about wrong use of chemicals of pesticide. We're using safe use of pesticide and good agricultural practices. Please do not fear those vegetables. Eat them. Thank you. Joshua,
you're muted.
Sorry. Thank you, David. Thank you for making it very clear. Let's wind up now with Jane Musindi to close for us the session for today.
Okay, thanks, Joshua. Thanks, everyone. My parting shot would be, regardless of what farming you will choose to carry out, whether organic or conventional or something in between, good agricultural practices is mandatory. It is good to have them. As Uri said, they are principles of production. It's like principles of accounting, good principles of farming require that. Sorry. Good principles of production require that you follow some laid out standards. Again, if we go back to organic farming, there are some areas especially in Nairobi, where you will think you're carrying out organic farming, but you're actually contaminating the crop more. For example, we know of areas in Nairobi where we are very urban. We live in small plots. So in these small plots, we decide we're going to do agriculture. And everybody in that plot will dig a long drop toilet, the home ones, because there's water problems. Then, since we want to do agriculture, which is irrigated, some of us will do boreholes. So those boreholes will be contaminated from the toilets. And this is the water we shall use on our soil. So we have to be careful that in trying to improve ourselves, that we are doing it the right way. We're just not doing it by textbook. You can't go on YouTube and decide, I'm going to grow my food like this to make me safer. You have to get advice from somebody who knows what that whole production will involve. So my parting shot, as I said, is whichever production method you use, tafadhali, follow good agricultural practice. And if you're going to sell this product to anyone, if you're going for this product to leave your gate and you get money for it, have a standard that you're following that will assure the consumer that whatever you produced is a safe product. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Jane. Kamau Mbarire says he has learned a lot from this session. Thank you very much, Kamau. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard from the experts themselves. What more can I add? All I can say to you is that keep logging into these sessions, because we are coming up with better topics for discussion that would really impact your lives as growers or as farmers. Next week, we could tackle issues to do with crop protection. And this is a fairly very challenging topic, which I would really encourage most of you to join and also learn and listen to the experts on this. From us this evening, as a panelist, we would like to thank you for taking your time to be with us. And from the management of soccer, I would like to say goodbye and have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, good night.